Hey guys, buckle up for a new episode of You and the Law Podcast, the one and only law enforcement podcast that's tackling critical policing and social justice issues and provides insights into the daily realities of policing with your host, Chief Virgil Green.
All right, welcome back to another episode of You and the Law Podcast. I am the host of the show, Chief Virgil Green, and as always, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us on our social media platforms, whether you're on LinkedIn Live or you're on YouTube Live or you're on You and the Law Podcast listening to the podcast. Definitely want to thank you for tuning in. And tonight, I've got back a guest who now is no stranger to You and the Law Podcast. Sean, I mean, you're becoming a regular, man. I'm gonna have to kind of put a check in the mail and make sure we kind of keep you coming on.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, man. Again, it's an honor to have you on, and we're going to be talking about the our part 2 of the 11 fatal flaws of leadership. And Sean, as you know, 2 weeks ago wasn't a lot of ground. We covered a lot in that hour, and tonight we're going to be really kind of diving more into the book that you got coming out and some things that you have identified throughout your military career, your law enforcement career, as what are these fatal flaws in leadership and how can leaders overcome those fatal flaws. So, if you're tuning in on LinkedIn or Facebook, or even if you're on the screen with us tonight, if you've got any comments, put them in the chat and for Sean and I, and we'll get to those comments throughout the chat. A lot of people are on with us, Sean. They got the cameras off. I can see Miguel. I can see. I want to say Kylie. I think is that your daughter?
I got the whole clan here.
You got the whole clan. Yeah, you got Joy.
Support network.
Yeah, man. So again, everybody who is on here supporting Sean, again, we want to thank you. And this podcast is definitely not going to be a boring topic tonight, Sean. We're going to be talking about some leadership skills. So Sean, for those who are not familiar with Sean, again, let our listeners know who you are, where you came from, and just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So again, my name is Sean Carroll. Retired lieutenant from the Providence Police Department in Rhode Island. I guess my life in 60 seconds is I was a Marine. I am a Marine. Became a Marine back in 1995, 94. Wow, it's been that long now. 94. Amazing experience. If Colonel Cordero is on, he'll be proud to see that I have my stuff, and he knows exactly what that is. One of the greatest achievements of my life, beside being a parent. After that, I worked a bunch of different jobs. I wound up getting on the police department in 1999, and I had a great career. I made it, like I said, to lieutenant. I was a commanding officer in the patrol bureau when I left after 23 years. I retired honorably, and I was fortunate enough to be selected to be an instructor for the FBI National Academy Association, and I traveled the country teaching law enforcement leadership to executive level law enforcement officers. So it was a great experience, and thank you for having me here tonight.
Yeah, well, Sean, I got to tell you, that is a big accomplishment, man, to get selected by the FBI to go around the country talking about leadership to others who are maybe already in a leadership role or trying to get into that leadership role. So man, definitely that's amazing. So go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. I appreciate that. And, it's funny because in all the years of teaching, I've done executive coaching and a lot of other stuff for many, many years. I think I've learned more as a teacher than I ever did as a student, going around and talking to officers of all types, of all kinds, from all different types of departments, some from corrections, some from district attorney's offices, but, mostly cops like us. And that was really awesome to talk to people like my man Miguel, who's a sergeant out there in Ohio. We had, all the way from patrol officers to chiefs. And it was really interesting because it gave me a very wide range of perspectives, from all different angles, from patrol officer, how they see the world from where they are, the first line supervisors and the mid-level managers, and then obviously the executive level people as well. So it was really, really great to be exposed to, to all of that stuff, especially at a turning point for law enforcement. I retired. I guess I was part of the Great Resignation. I retired in January of 22. I worked, touring for quite a while. Unfortunately, my wife had some health issues. The good news is she's good. I came off the road and I got into emergency management, but here I am. And, after the pleading of many people, I finally completed the book, which is based on all the stuff that I taught with the FBI, National Academy Association, and all the stuff that I learned along the way. And I added a bunch of stuff to it. So, new book is coming out at the printer now. It's called AIO Leadership for Law Enforcement, the proven system that legendary leaders use to adapt, improvise, and overcome when failure is not an option. So I'm excited to finally have that. And then as an add-on to that, there's also going to be an online mentorship program that we'll be doing with some monthly modules and a lot of other cool stuff. So I'm really, really excited, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience tonight. Thank you.
But again, Sean, definitely want to thank you and just the knowledge that you bring to the conversation about leadership. There's you can never, and I've said this throughout my career, you can never have enough knowledge and understanding about being a leader, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector. And you and I were in the public sector, and so a lot of people shine. And I don't know if I asked you this question a couple of weeks ago, but a lot of people said, hey, I want to be the chief, or I want to be the sergeant, I want to be the lieutenant, I want to be the captain, whatever it may be. But then when you get into that position, and here's a crisis that happened, now all of a sudden, people are looking at you to make decisions as to how the team is going to lead, what are you going to do, and people can tell if you're ready or not. And even those who may be a little bit more seasoned than you, but some kind of way they kind of felt like they kind of got overlooked and you got put in a position to be over them. But what does it really take to be a good leader?
That's a great question, and
I know
we could spend an hour just talking about that.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, what I was thinking about when you started framing the question was, there was plenty of people that I used to say, careful what you wish for, you just might get it. Because a lot of the stuff that we face, especially in law enforcement, is much, much different than what you face in the corporate world or in any other aspect of life. So, it's really, for me, I and this is my personal opinion, I think that this is leadership. Really, it's about the ability to influence people. I mean, really at its core, in its simplest format, that's what it is. You're in charge, you're trying to get a group of people to accomplish a mission, whatever that mission may be. But as we had started to talk about a little bit last time, I think the issue that we have, particularly in law enforcement, is that there's really not a lot of training. And that was before the defund the police movement and all the other stuff that's going on right now. So that's a variable, and even when you do get it, as I had talked about with my own personal experience, by the time I went to leadership training, it was way after I had gotten promoted, almost to the point that it was almost like, why am I here? Because if you're waiting 2 or 3 years to send someone to a school, they've already been doing the job for that long.
Yeah.
And I made the comparison being in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, it's the opposite. You have all the requirements, you're selected, and until you finish all the level appropriate training, you're not promoted. So you have to have that all done. Whereas we kind of do it backwards. And I addressed that directly. One of the chapters in the book is titled "Fake It Till You Fail," because people throw that term around, "fake it till you make it," and unfortunately, that might work at at Applebee's or, at IBM or whatever, but it doesn't work when bullets are flying. And that's a really big deal that I don't think people take seriously enough. And that's kind of where I've pushed back too, to some of the people that with the whole defund the police is, all right, so let me get this straight. You're unhappy with the way things are being done, and your solution is to train cops less. In most states, it takes more hours to be a hairdresser than it does to get a gun and a badge and be a cop. So
exactly,
that the logic doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
But I understand, the concept. So I think that leadership really is, like I said, it's the ability to influence people, get them to follow you, get them to do what needs to be done willingly. And it's the crazy part is, and I say this a lot, leadership itself is not, it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's simple, but it's not easy,
Exactly.
and you can read it in a book and you can figure, get it all figured out and watch TV shows and all that stuff. But until you're actually in it, like you and I both know, it's a totally different game. And, just like anything else, I think once you have been around a while and you've been through some stuff, when you know that you're talking to somebody else that's been through the same, it doesn't matter where you are, what job you've been on, how big, how small, whatever, you just kind of look at that person like, yep, like, the way Harley riders wave to each other, like, you're in the club. We know we've been through some stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a really important variable that I think is overlooked, because I think people focus so much on the process of getting promoted, getting that test score, getting that interview. But then it's almost like, all right, now once you finally get there, well, now what? Because, unfortunately, this is one of those things that, as much as we have policies and guidelines and procedures, there's no manual, and that's kind of one of the things that I had hoped to do with this book, was to be able to create something that no matter where you are, no matter what level you're at, and quite frankly, no matter what aspect of life, this stuff that we're talking about will make you a better parent, better partner, and just make life easier in general. So I think that as a profession, I think if we just continue to do things like what you're doing with this podcast, spreading the word, getting the word out, educating people, bringing more training, bringing people like myself that have that institutional knowledge that kind of stepped out very quickly before we got a chance to really pay it forward to the next generation behind us. I think that's the best we can do. We can't change the environment that we're in, but we can certainly adapt, improvise, and overcome.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I want to share this with you and the listeners that, this is a quote that I have put up at the police departments that I've been at, and it's about leadership. It's from General Colin Powell. I think along with one of the greatest minds in the military when it comes to leadership. And this quote is, leadership is solving problems. The day soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you have stopped leading them. I don't know if you ever heard that quote.
That quote's actually in the book, believe it or not.
Is it? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I have a whole section. As a matter of fact, when I one of the clips that I use religiously is a fantastic video. It's only about 2.5 minutes long, and it was actually at the end of a press conference when Colin Powell was the Secretary of State, and it was the very last question, and a reporter asked him about leadership, and it was one of the greatest quotes, and you can tell that he was kind of ad-libbing it, and at one point he mentions that concept, and he frames it in the way of when he was learning from senior leaders, and they were telling him when your team will follow you up a mountain, down a ravine, around a dark corner, that's when and he mentions the same thing about when people stop bringing you their problems, then that's when I wish that more people would listen to that quote. Because he was easily one of the greatest leaders. I agree with you, of all time.
Yeah. Well, and Sean, I put this on the door coming into the police department. When you come in, you're going to see it. You're going out, you're going to see it. Excuse me. And I'm a firm believer that the more you see something, the more it's going to be there in your mind, and that when something happens, it's going to take you back to, oh, wow, I remember seeing this here on the door, wherever it was. So I've had people say, well, Chief, why do you put these little quotes all around the department? Because, again, I think, it's important for people to understand that if you're putting a message out there like that, that it means something. And to me, it's just a constant reminder about, being a leader. And also, just because you don't have a title as being a sergeant or lieutenant or captain or whatever it may, even a chief, doesn't mean that you're not a leader. And I think that's where um, we don't talk about that often. That you know, just a rookie can come into the department, and he or she may come from the private sector, and they picked up on things in the private sector that they can bring up into the public sector. And so I think it's real important for leaders to listen to people. And how can you speak on that, Sean, about leaders being able to adapt and not always want to be in control?
That's a tough one, especially in our profession.
It is. It
We're a
is.
very macho, testosterone filled, silverback type mentality, and if I can go back a second to just to comment on what the first thing you had said, I love the idea of the quotes. I'm a huge proponent of the same. On my door, I have a picture. I don't know if you've ever seen it, of the stork that's eating the frog, but the frog is choking the stork out, and it says "Never quit."
Mm-hmm.
That's been with me my entire life. And then on the inside of the door is actually a quote from Maya Angelou, the poet laureate, and it says,
Yeah.
People will forget what you did, people will forget what you said, but they'll
Mm-hmm.
never forget how you made them feel." And so
Exactly.
I have the one facing out to remind people of our mentality is we never quit. We stay in the fight. But the inside one is to remind myself that at the end of the day, it's, to your point, it's making people feel that you care about them. That's how you get to lead. That's how you get the trust that Colin Powell was talking about.
Yeah.
Because I think, unfortunately, all too many times, there are a lot of police stations that have awesome quotes, but the
Yeah.
problem is the leadership doesn't follow it. When it
Exactly.
says trust, integrity, this, that, the other, and everybody behind the doors are backstabbing and playing political games, and as I
Mm-hmm.
call it, the Game of Thrones, then it's not worth the paper it's written on. And that, we're a tough crowd. Cops are a tough crowd, and we're tough customers, but if you do the work and you do let them know that you care about them, that's when you get their loyalty. That's when they will, run through a burning wall of bricks for you. And it takes time. It's very, very difficult to do, especially if, as I have had happen to me, and I'm sure you did too, when you're taking over for someone that was terrible, or especially if it's a couple of people that were terrible, because
Yeah.
now you're the next one. All right, what's this guy going to do? So, that's a challenge, and I think, but to answer your question directly, what can people do, to create that level of leadership? I think you got to start with the basics. Just be aware,
Yeah.
and be aware of, I talk about, the first fatal flaw, lack of awareness, both self-awareness and situational awareness. So that means being aware of myself. How am I acting? What's my facial expression? What's my body language?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's the situational? How am I interacting with the team? Am I reading how are they reading me? If they're looking at me like something's wrong, then maybe that's a clue. So, and to be completely honest with you, the short answer is humility. You have to be humble enough to realize you don't need to pretend like you know everything. You don't need to have all the answers. Matter of fact, I love the quote. I think it was Steve Jobs. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I
Yeah.
always took great pride in that. Being a New England fan for many years. There's a great picture of Bill Belichick with 7 Super Bowl trophies. And, I would say to people, do you know how many passes he threw? How many yards he's got on the ground? None. He never stepped foot on the field, but he's got 7 trophies, 7 championships. So it's not about what you did. It's about what we did. And if you develop that mindset and that mentality, it grows, because that also lets your team feel empowered. They feel like there's room to grow, and it's not always you have the final word. No one listens. And I think that's the hardest part. The hardest part is getting out of our own way, putting the ego aside. As I mentioned in the book, I actually call it ego inoculation.
Mm-hmm.
But that only comes from being confident, and being confident comes from being competent. And I think that's where people miss that You got to follow the bouncing ball. If you're not competent, then you're not going to be confident. Why would you be? Unless you're doing the fake it till you make it. And we'll see through that in 2 seconds. And all it takes is one critical incident to blow that out of the water.
Oh,
and
yeah.
In some cases, it might end careers or even lives. And that's why it's so important for us to focus on this.
Exactly. Well, hey, Sean, I just want to remind those who are just now tuning into the podcast, if you're watching live on LinkedIn Live, or if you're watching live on our YouTube, You and the Law podcast on YouTube, or if you're watching live on You and the Law podcast on Facebook, definitely want to thank you for tuning in for another informative topic. Tonight, we've got part 2 of our conversation about the 11 fatal flaws of leadership. If you got any questions, put them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Just how have you dealt with leadership challenges in your profession? So Sean, let's get into what's number one. What is the number one? What starts the what is the 11 fatal flaws that's in the book?
Great question. Yes. So the first one, as I just mentioned, is lack of awareness, right? That's
okay.
The first thing is, because if you don't even know how you're being received or how you're acting and how people are interpreting you, then you really don't have a chance. So you have to want to be aware, and then, it just takes time. It's a practice thing, just like the way we deal with crises, like we get cool, calm. That doesn't happen right away. That takes dozens or hundreds of incidents and years of experience that you slowly just get more comfortable. So that's the first one, is you got to be aware. The second one is a lack of strategic thinking. And just to recap, I know I didn't address it tonight, but I had mentioned it in a longer form in the last interview, just so everybody's aware. Where this came from was through the years of teaching. I was trying to figure out, if I was going to teach a course, are there some common denominators? Are there certain things that if we had the keys to those locks, if you will, that would really change the game? And when I look back through hundreds of years of everything, and not just law enforcement, across every industry and every genre, I figured out these catastrophic leadership failures. They wound up coming into falling into 11 different categories. So the first one, lack of awareness, situational and self-awareness. Number 2, poor strategic thinking. I think that kind of speaks for itself. A lot of times we might be able to get through this situation, but we're not thinking about, what the political ramifications might be, or whatever the case might be, where our department happens to be. The third one is weak adaptability, the ability to adapt. As Darwin said, that's really how survival of the fittest gets determined, and it's no different in the law enforcement profession. Inability to delegate. I'm sorry.
Now, you just mentioned number 3, what being able to adapt.
Absolutely.
So I think, when you talk about being able to adapt, I want to get your opinion on this. Is that something that once you get to a rank of let's say a lieutenant or above, have you seen where it's difficult for people who get into those high ranking positions, or even all the way up to the chief, the ability to adapt and to change their leadership styles? Because once you get in your comfort zone, you kind of feel like, I know what I'm doing. I don't need somebody else to come along and tell me. But you got to be able to adapt to the changes of the times.
It's really by far the most important skill, in my opinion. And the reason why is because, don't forget, at each level you have different concerns, right? So if I'm a sergeant, my concern is taking care of my team. If I'm a lieutenant and I'm in charge of an entire bureau or entire shift, I have different concerns. If I'm a captain or a major, so as a sergeant, the sergeant's not necessarily worried about what the mayor's going to say. The chief definitely is. The chief may not be worried about some of the minutia of, how a call got taken care of, but the sergeant does. So that, again, I think it all comes back to humility, because when I was a sergeant, in some ways I was different. my personality wasn't different, but
Mm-hmm.
the way I led. And I mean, an easy example, we talk about adaptability. I remember when my father was a legend on the job. When the Miranda thing came out, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was like, we're never going to be able to get a confession ever from anybody. I forget it. It's now you're going to tell these, so, and obviously we adjusted, we did it again. We've done it over and over. We did it with body cameras, most recently. So these are things that are going to happen whether you like them or not. So
Yeah.
if you want to resist them, do it at your own peril. But
Yeah.
if you can adapt to that and learn how to use a little Aikido, and that's where the AIO comes from, is the ability to adapt, improvise, overcome.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest thing. But as people get higher in rank, I think two things happen. One, like you said, is they feel stuck in their routine. Like, this is who I am. This is how I'm known. And I think the other part of it is the environment and the organization that they're in, because you could be an amazing, thoughtful leader that everybody appreciates and likes and respects. But if you're working in an environment where no one else is like you and no one else is doing the things that you're doing, and it's really, really difficult for you to make the impact that you want to make, because you're really just swimming upstream. And I think that's the biggest issue, is people feel locked in, like you said, like, this is who I am. And they feel like if they change their style in any way, somehow it'll be interpreted as weakness or something. And but again, that comes from the top, right? When
Mm-hmm.
people recognize, no, that's great. That's a growth thing. That, I used the example last time we talked about car chases, right? As an officer, I mean, who doesn't love it? It's exciting, right? Because you're not thinking about the bad things that could happen. And I was
Yeah.
very, very lucky in all the ones that I ever had, that nothing, that bad ever did happen.
Yeah.
But later on, I remember having those conversations with some of the guys that, that knew me for a while. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, you're calling off this chase, or, you're doing this, but I remember you had, you went all the way to Boston that time, and, and it's all these other things. And I say, yeah, but I'm not trying to make excuses, but I was in a different place. I'm
Yeah.
responsible for you. I'm responsible for you. You know what?
Yeah.
And I tell a story of a state trooper that I met out in the Midwest, and he was talking about this car chase that he got into. And the long story short, bad guy wrecks, and it turns out that 3 people are killed, and it just so happens that it was that officer's family.
Oh, wow. Wait a
And
second. The officer who was pursuing the suspect.
bad
Wow.
guy hits his wife and kids, and killed his wife and 2 of his 3 kids.
Yeah.
And when he told that story, obviously the room was, you could hear a pin drop. And
Yeah.
the point he was trying to make is not that you should stop chases, but the point is what are you chasing for, and are you willing to make that sacrifice
Mm-hmm.
for that bad guy?
Yeah.
And I think the difference when it comes to that, 20, 30 years ago, bad guys took off because they were bad guys, and they weren't taken off for a suspended license or those types of things. Whereas now everybody takes off for everything all the time. I mean, you watch these body camera videos these days, and half of them end with the person, the first thing they're yelling is, "You're not supposed to be chasing me," or whatever.
Yeah.
Just, so being able to adjust your style, being able to grow, being able to say, I need to continue to learn more, is a challenge for a lot of people. But I think the ones that do are some of the best, for obvious reasons.
Yeah. What Sean, just the story you just told about the trooper that you were talking to in the car chase. I remember a story back. Well, I mean, it happened with the former sheriff back home in Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma County. His name was Sheriff John Wetzel. He lost his family to somebody who was being pursued. And a lot of people, everybody has pursuit policies, and you have to meet certain, if it's not a felony or whatever it may be, you're not going to chase anybody. And so that turns off a lot of people, because you want to catch the person you're saying is a bad guy, but you kind of lose sight that is a great danger to the general public. And as you and I have seen, there are so many unfortunate videos where people are being pursued, and the wrong people end up, getting seriously hurt or killed. But again, that's a leadership decision that you got to make, that sergeant or even that lieutenant may have to say, well, we need to call this pursuit off. Now, a lot of guys and ladies may not like it when that pursuit is called off because they don't understand all the other elements that come along with that.
Right.
But that leader really needs to stand by that decision and say, this is why I did, make that decision. Because guess what? That person that we let go, they got, stopped in another neighboring city and there wasn't a pursuit. But again, it just kind of goes back to the kind of leader you are and being firm about those decisions that you make, and that it's in the best interest of not of the officer and mainly the public. Because if we go out there and we seriously injure somebody or kill somebody, how do you live with that, knowing that the person still got away, or maybe they didn't get away, but several lives were lost during that process.
And I, it's funny that you say that because, I remember one night working with another boss, who won't be named, and we were talking earlier about taking on that responsibility. And sometimes people, they want the promotion because they want the raise, they want the rank, they want this, that, the other, but they just are not really leading, and they certainly don't have a lot of courage. And I remember one night there was a pursuit, and the other boss that I was working with calls it off, and he saw me laugh out loud, and he had a weird look on his face because he didn't understand why I was laughing. And because it was a knee-jerk reaction. It was a foot pursuit. He thought it was a car chase, and he was telling him to break it off, as he's chasing this bad guy through backyards, and then he looked around like he looked like an idiot, but as funny as it was, it also was it told you a lot about that individual's mindset.
Mm-hmm.
They were risk averse to the nth degree, to the point that it was foolish. And, and to finish that conversation that I had with that officer, first of all, I had a conversation with that officer about explaining why I broke the chase off. Mm-hmm. And I said to that officer, I'm not only thinking about chasing the bad guy, I've done it. And I've broken chases off myself. And it's not fun. It really isn't. It's difficult to do. But I said, so what we were just talking about a minute ago of where you are in the chain, right? Mm-hmm. I said, what I'm thinking about sitting in this chair here is I'm thinking about, God forbid, being next to your casket, explaining to your parents or your wife or your husband why you're not here with us. Yeah. And they're going to say, that's your fault. Then you should have followed the policy. And they didn't care whether that bad guy or bad girl got caught or not. What they care about is that you come home. And that's what I mean is, depending on where you are, your perspective is different. The way you're gonna lead is gonna be different. But it's still adhering to the same general principles.
Yeah. Well, Sean, there's something I picked up on some other training that I've been to, and I kind of use this analogy. Where are you at on the ladder? Are you at the bottom of the ladder, middle of the ladder, the top of the ladder? Where are you at on that ladder in your decision-making skills when it comes to being a leader? Because this, Sean, everybody, we all have bad days. And if you are having a bad day, you're not going to make good decision-making skills. Your leadership skills are going to lack, whether that's in the private sector or the public sector. You can work at Burger King and still make a bad decision about how many patties you put on the grill, and all of them burn. And now, that's a waste. Now you got to try to tell your manager why 40 hamburger patties are no good. So, but in policing, if you go out and you make a bad decision, it could potentially, make the media, could potentially, cause somebody to be put on, some days off or whatever. But you got to continue to make good judgment skills. And I just saw a video, Sean, about this case that took place in, was it Ohio? The Sonia Massey incident, where the deputy went in and Sonia Massey had called for some mental health issues. And I don't know if you remember this incident about it. It occurred last year. And the deputy goes in, some kind of way. She makes a statement that I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, and he pulls his firearm out and he shoots her in the face and kills her. Now is facing a second degree murder charge, and there's been so much conversation about this. What led to making that decision to draw your firearm out on somebody who is unarmed and take that person's life. And it kind of comes back. And this person was in the military. He served. I believe he was in the Army. I think he may have got honorably discharged or discharged from the military. And that's why I kind of go back to leadership. We got to make sure we're putting the right people in the right positions. And when those people make bad decisions, we need to figure out why that decision was made. And I don't know if you can speak on, if this is in the book, how you speak on taking some ownership when you make some mistakes, and also being a leader to know when to remove somebody who is not being a good leader.
It's a great point. And like I said a few minutes ago, I think people need to really think more about what the responsibility. Basically, the way I explain it is the tough stuff, the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Anybody can get promoted and get the rank, get the take-home car, get the promotion with the money and all the other perks and benefits that come along with it. Mm-hmm. But when the difficult stuff happens, and as I used to say to all, even now, the managers that work for me, this is where you're making your money. Mm-hmm. When you have to let somebody go, or when you have to make a difficult call on something that's going to hurt somebody else, that you don't mean to, you got to do what's best for the team. Those are things that when people get into these roles, that it's almost like they don't understand that this was going to happen. Like, how did you not know? Like, of course it's not if it's going to happen. It's just when.
It's when. Well, right? in effect, Sean, people need to look at what happened to somebody else that was in that position before them. 100%. And what did you learn from that person who made a bad decision, and what led to that person being moved to another division, or, taking an early retirement. So, because there's examples out there for all of us to look at, to say, I need to make sure I don't make that same decision.
Yeah. I think the across the board, no matter what rank you are, I think, and by the way, I'd like to separate tactical from operational.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, like when you describe that example, or any example of use of force, to me, there are two huge variables. One that never gets talked about, which is proper sleep. And having worked most of my career on the night shift, that's why, it's especially sensitive to me, because if anybody has been through that or experienced sleep deprivation, just what it does to your mind, what it does to your body. And it certainly affects even just not eating right, all these other things. But that's number one. And number two is training. Holy cow. Like the more you put people through scenario training, the more you put people through even ethical scenario training, like you're at a call, there's a bunch of money on the table, you're with another officer, and all of a sudden, a stack of money goes missing. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So the way you build that leadership muscle is by practicing with it. So when you, like I said at the beginning, when you take somebody and you send them to the range once a year, and they fire their gun once a year, and they never take it out of the holster any other time, and you can tell because the people that are next to you at the range and their gun is caked and full of gunk because they've been working road details and never took care of their firearm. And so how's that going to go? When it was funny, because when I first got on, like I said, my dad was on the job. He was a detective, but I desperately wanted to work in the South Side at the time. That was not only was that where pretty much a majority of the big crime was, but that's where there was a really awesome group of senior officers that worked down there, and you had to kind of earn your way in. And I was very, very fortunate to be allowed in to that group, and I learned more in the short time that I was with those officers and everything. And it wasn't just tactics; it was everything about how to be a cop and how to be a leader, you know. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that I've learned and that I certainly put in the book was, like you said, was watching other people make these mistakes. Sometimes it's the way that they treated you. Sometimes it was what they did or why. And I think there's absolutely a lot to be learned. That's why in each of the chapters, I actually use a law enforcement failure story to demonstrate and I'm using really high level stuff like George Floyd and Rodney King, things that everybody knows, they've all seen. So it's easy to talk about. And then in the same chapter, I also use a success story of saying, now here's the opposite of when it was done correctly. And it's not done to throw any shade on any individual. It's simply like when I was a football coach, you know, you have a game, you watch the game, you break down the tape, you learn from it, and you improve for the next time. Same thing here. It's not about egos. It's simply, how do we get better? How do we make better decisions, to your point? And I think that if we continue to stress the importance of training, and not only tactical training, because everything that we're talking about here, that this isn't what you don't learn leadership at the range.
Yeah.
You know, you don't learn it in the classroom as much. It's more about out in the field. And if you really think about it, you know, certainly as I toured the country talking to officers, that to me was one of the biggest issues. Was they have no pipeline. There's no system in place to identify the hard chargers. Who are the officers that, and like we talked about in our last conversation, that's only part of the equation, right? Yeah. So if you're a gun magnet and you can go out there and grab 100 guns a year, you're a super cop. But that doesn't automatically mean you're going to be a great sergeant, you know, and vice versa. Yeah. So I think if we continue to focus on doing both and spending as much time talking about things like leadership, emotional intelligence, you know, especially with the generation that is coming into law enforcement now, that's really one of the biggest shortfalls, of just because of, you know, the life that they've lived. It's not even their fault. But if we can continue to focus on those skills and build those skills, I think we're going to start to see some really great things. Because I got to tell you, on a personal level, I'm really afraid. I'm afraid for the profession and the reason why I say that is not only is there a lack of training, but I'm watching the bar get lower and lower and lower and lower.
It is.
Now you can be 18 with a couple of arrests and maybe a felony, as long as it's nothing violent. You know, like some wild stuff that we never would have considered years ago, and it's a difficult situation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sean. You know, the profession is definitely changing, and I think it's being noticed across the country because certain agencies are lowering their standards, even with the education. Education is almost, some agencies are not changing, but you got some agencies who are changing education. They're changing the minimum requirements. They're overlooking certain, you know, criminal past, you know, records. And to say, hey, this is a new generation, everybody gets arrested for marijuana. But again, at what cost is it going to cost the profession? There's a comment in the private chat from Matt. He said, I was fortunate enough to work with the good lieutenant. It was a tremendous loss for our department when he left, but he continues contribution to the field, tremendous gain for the industry at large. You're definitely right, man. I mean, you know, you're talking about your buddy, Sean. He is
I paid a lot for that, so thank you, Brad. I'll Venmo you later.
But you know, Sean, you touched on something that I've talked about on our podcast before. You know, we need to have firearms training, but how much time do we spend on leadership training? How much time do we spend on professional development? How much time do we spend on sending men and women, getting them out of their comfort zone, getting them around, you know, other parts of the country to see what's going on the West Coast, or what's going on the East Coast or Midwest or whatever it may be, because you're going to get exposed to a lot of different people, and it's all about networking. And so, you know, FBI Leader has a great training executive, you know, platform. And I've told officers, it costs a little bit of money to get you there. But I think in the end, we got to invest in people. And I told my training sergeant this not too long ago. He's like, yeah, Chief, we got to spend X amount of money on on fire, on ammo. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but I also want to spend X amount of money on leadership. And it was like, well, we never really focused on leadership before. And I'm like,
Right.
that's what's missing in this industry, in this culture, Sean. I just think is that certain agencies have not gotten away from it because they're going to make sure they're going to send somebody to the FBI academy, or they're going to send somebody to SMIP, or they're going to send somebody to some high level of leadership training, not just because they see there's something in that person that's worth investing, but we've got to start doing that at every rank in exposing these young officers to leadership. And so then when a sergeant position does come open and you apply for it, you've already had some basic training, some basic skills as to what a sergeant is going to do.
Yeah, and I think, like I said last time, the biggest thing that people don't really think about is that by getting leadership training, even if you're not in a leadership role yet or may never be, by learning what leadership is about, makes you a better follower as well. You
Yeah.
know, where you start to understand the concepts, the things, and you can think like that other person. Because to your point, when you mentioned earlier about, the informal leaders, those are some of the most powerful people in the department. And I'm sure you've seen them too. And I mean, I had
Yeah.
them in my career. There was that senior patrol officer that could pretty much tell the chief off and no one would say anything, because of the way they were respected. They'd been around for 40 years. Not that they
Mm-hmm.
would. I'm just using that as an
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
But that's the person that, even me, right? When I was, even as a lieutenant, there were people that had trained me when I first got on. So I'm not going to saunter up to their scene and start pointing and telling them what to do,
Yeah.
and I don't know how many times I would walk up to someone like that and go, so what do we got? And they would look at me and they knew exactly what I was doing. That was a sign of
Mm-hmm.
respect. They
Yeah.
knew I knew, and I knew they knew.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't need me to tell them, but I didn't do watch me peacock
Yeah.
for you and show you how great I am.
Mm-hmm.
It was very humble and to say, hey, you've already got this figured out. Do you need me to do anything? No. Okay, cool. I'll
Mm-hmm.
see you back at the station. Good job.
Yeah.
And that's, I think for some people it's harder to do. But I think that's about who you are, and if you're that person that always wants everyone to salute you every time you walk in the room and, all that type of foolishness. I think that
Yeah.
that just shows where you're coming from. But,
Yeah.
as we move forward, the other thing that's really, really important to mention when you mention training, especially the younger generation, I will tell you this myself. I have spoken to, I don't know how many young officers across the country. And when I throw out, in my training about how the average younger officer is only with an agency 2 to 3 years and they
Mm-hmm.
bounce. In our generation, for us, that never happened.
Mm-hmm.
I know, and we talked about this too. I know in certain parts of the country, officers move around because of, there's a $20,000 pay difference from the small department to the big county sheriffs or whatever the case might be. But the reason why the younger generation is leaving is not because of body cameras or getting recorded. It's because they're not investing in them. And I've heard them say it to my face. Sean, if the department doesn't think enough of me to give me a career track and show me how I can become a detective, or show me how I can become a sergeant, or show me how I can become a traffic investigator, or whatever it is that I want to do,
Mm-hmm.
that it's not just the good old boy network, or you got to be on the A team, or you wait your turn, right? And I'm on a 10-man department that I got 9 guys that got on 5 years ago, and I'm going to be 80 before I can even make corporal or sergeant.
Yeah.
Those are things that really go a long way. So, and essentially what they're saying is, if you don't care about me, then I don't care about you. And the way they feel cared about is not just backing them when something happens, but it's investing in their future, sending them to training proactively, not waiting until they've been a sergeant for 3 years to send them. Because even though that happened to that one individual, everyone else was watching that too. Right.
Yeah.
So how sincere is it really? Were you really preparing me to be ready for this role? Or were you just checking a box because Kalia says, you have to send your people to a school?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hey, Sean, I want to get to a comment that Joey put up on the board in the chat. He says, I believe people need to learn how to apply what they learn as well. There are a lot of individuals who can retain and understand leadership, but applying what you've been shown is hard, is the hard part. Being able to take your losses with the pride and learn from that, uh, learning from that to reshape your leadership. Good comment, Joy. Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and I think to a fault, I have always been very humble in that respect, and I remember being a young sergeant, and more than once having a couple of guys, and maybe not right at the time, but shortly thereafter, getting them together, go, hey man, sorry guys, I definitely screwed that up.
Yeah.
And the crazy part
Mhm.
is I remember one time a boss that was above me who we got along really really well, and he like really respected each other. He was like, "What are you doing? Why would you say that?" And so I explained it. I wasn't very articulate, but
Mhm.
what I can tell you now, with what I know is in situations like that, what a lot of leaders don't realize is that you can gain infinitely more trust
Oh
and
yeah.
loyalty by showing you're flawed, that
Just
you're
who
a
you
human
are.
being.
Yeah,
I do things
exactly.
too,
You make a mistake.
and
Yeah.
I mean, even when it comes down to, I remember telling all my officers, everybody has a thing, right?
Yeah.
My thing was, do not spit on me. And I would tell my guys, if you
Yeah.
see somebody spitting on anywhere near me, you need
Yeah.
to grab me and drag me out of here, because that I don't want to wind up on YouTube for the wrong reason, and I don't
Yeah.
want to put you in a bad spot. But if you care about me, then you'll stop me, and not that it ever happened like that, but I've had
Yeah.
more than one occasion where, and I'm sure we've all been there, right? Where someone's doing one of these, like, hey
Mhm.
man, we're recording, like,
Yeah.
careful, you're getting a little carried away, that type of
Mhm.
stuff. So it's but the point I'm making is, when you show people that you're human, when you show people that you're fallible, that you do make mistakes, instead of, a lot of people have that misconception, like, oh my God, it's gonna shatter this image that they have of me, of this perfect leader, when no one really thought that in the first place,
Yeah.
but if you tell them you're a regular person and say,
Mhm.
you know what, here's what I did, here's what I should have did, and I won't make that mistake twice, but I'm owning it in front of you. I think it really goes a long way, and if more people understood that, and were, quite frankly, Chief, if they were just more humble, people, there are a lot of people, even the younger generation, that are still keeping the part that they want, meaning that I'm the boss. Like, listen to me because I said so. Don't question me. Don't ask why. Just sit over
Yeah.
there, shut up. And I think that's come and gone. And if
Oh
you're
yeah.
approaching a young crew with that, you're not going to
Mhm.
get anywhere. And those people are going to
No.
be on Monster and Indeed putting applications in, and it's not if they leave, it's just when and how long
When
it'll take for them to get out of there.
and if they may not go to another agency, they just may get out of the profession all because they've seen it at other agencies or they've talked to people at other agencies and it may not be a culture that they want to get into and they may have came into they may have have a background in IT and oh I don't want to do that. Well, let me try being a police officer. Then all of a sudden they try that and it's not what they thought it was going to be, or they just had a bad experience and they go back to a different profession. So we got to be real careful about the, the messages that we're putting out there because again, a lot of agencies are are not able to recruit like we were you know 5 years ago, 6 years ago,
Sure.
definitely since since COVID. So Sean, let's get into we're coming up on man this hour, Sean. Golly, man, we need to have a, we don't want to have a boring. I don't want to have a boring podcast, but man, we need to have maybe like a 2 hour podcast. I don't know, but
Well, maybe we'll do
this
round three.
out. Yeah, well, yeah, man. Because so we were on number three. What's the fourth
Yeah, so
fatal
I'll rip
flaws
through.
of
I'll
leadership?
I'll rip through them really quick. So
You,
you
you
got,
you don't have to rip through them real quick, man. But again, I don't want as I told you before, this is I think a conversation that really needs to be had on so many levels when it comes to leadership because we've seen so many poor decision making skills,
right.
and we have so many people who are going to leadership training that you've taught, around the country. And I want to ask you this question later on, but go ahead and you, like I said, you don't have to rip through them. But what's the next fatal flaw on your 11 fatal flaw?
The next one is the inability to delegate effectively, which ties in very much to what you were just saying, is that I'm the boss, I'm in charge. I make the decisions. I'm the bottleneck to everything. And
Mm-hmm.
that sounds great until two things happen at once or something big happens, and then you have to depend on your team, and if you've never conditioned them or brought them or put them in situations where they could learn, even just by watching, then you're not really setting your team up for success, and then number 5 is ineffective communication skills, which is a huge one,
Huge, yeah.
especially for the younger generation, because a lot of these younger guys and girls, they COVID, they sat in a basement for 3 years, didn't see another human being. Everybody
Mhm.
knows how to type, talk, text, but they can't, I'm sorry, not talk, but type, and they'll text you, like they don't want to call the station to find out what their assignment is. They just send me a text.
Yeah.
Like, I remember a really funny story of when Snapchat became a thing, and one of the really older sergeants who didn't know what that was. I'll just leave it out there that it didn't end well, but it was a misunderstanding about how that was
Yeah.
supposed to work. So
Yeah. Snapchat was almost like a bad word. Snapchat. What are you? Oh.
Yeah, we had a whole lot of names for it that were similar, but
Yeah.
and then you get into poor decision making, poor risk management, inadequate networking and relationship building, which is a really big one these days, particularly outside the agency. Making partners with people that are in the private sector and stakeholders. Another big one, weak and untested crisis leadership. Because that's the fake it till you fail. Like, there's no making it up and as you go when something crazy's happening.
Yeah.
Having poor conflict resolution skills is a really big one.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm mostly referring to internally,
Yeah.
how to deal with the team and the infighting and the egos and all that stuff, not the external.
Yeah.
And then a lack of coaching and mentoring skills. And the last one, like I said, is last but not least, is the absence of humility. People that just let their egos get the best of them. And again, in the book, I have each chapter. There's a chapter dedicated to each of those. There's 11 of them, and there's 11 failure stories. And it explains why, and it gives a background of the story and explains what went wrong, and then a success story, and it shows you, because I thought that's the easiest way to demonstrate, not just talk about the concept, which I do, but also to show it. Here's how it was done the wrong way. Here's how it was done the right way. And then at the end, I have a fictional character, Dale Thompson, that is in a West Texas town where the last.
You said West Texas?
Yes, sir.
Is that a fictional town or a real town?
I didn't pick a name. I just used West Texas. I got a lot of friends out there.
Okay, I'm gonna say, because West Texas is close to my home border state of New Mexico. So
oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in it, so each of the chapters goes through, it follows him through his career, through some critical incidents and situations that he has to face of different types. So the first one's more tactical, the other one's more operational, and then it's more of an executive level. Because again, I'm trying to appeal to everybody, and just because you're a patrolman doesn't mean that you don't need to be thinking about things, down the line of maybe you're thrust into a situation like the officer I mentioned last time we talked. Young guy, 2 years on the job, small job, and he's a deputy chief in 3 years, and now he's doing city council meetings and budgets, and he had no idea how to do any of those things, and just because everybody left, and he was thrust into that role. So just because you're not a chief yet doesn't mean you can't appreciate the perspective. And that was, when you mentioned earlier, it was one of the things that I really liked teaching. Was I had 3 photographs that I would show, and my man Miguel, and I know who else is on, would remember this. 3 photographs. First one is a bunch of trees in the forest. The second one is kind of like an aerial shot of that. And then the third one is like a mountaintop. And I would show the 3 pictures, and I would say, does anybody know what all 3 of these pictures have in common? And I would cycle them back and forth. Forest, up in the air, and then way up top of a mountain. And I would say they're all taken from the same location, but at different elevations. Like you had mentioned, where you are on the ladder, right?
Yeah.
So the officer is down in the forest, right? I'm just trying to get through the night, get through the shift, deal with whatever. The managers are worried about how the day-to-day is happening, and then how the department is interacting with the public. And certainly the chief is worried about the media and all the other things, but they're not necessarily, they're all there for everybody, but they're significantly different. It might be 99% media relations for the chief, 1% tactics, where it's the
Yeah.
opposite for the officer, 1 in 99. So I think by people not only looking at these situations for what they are, but at each of those different perspectives from the ground level, the mid level, and the upper level, it really gives you a really full perspective and understanding from every level of how you need to think about the same situation in different terms.
Yeah. Hey, Sean, I want to get to a comment on LinkedIn from Rick Morrison. Rick, man, it's been a while since you joined us, Rick. Sean, I don't know if you've ever connected with Rick on LinkedIn, but like you, he gets around the country, you know, going to different agencies, putting on trainings. And so, Rick, man, we got to get you to come back on the podcast, Rick. If you're still on LinkedIn, getting you and Sean on the same podcast, man, would definitely be an honor because you guys bring so much knowledge related to training, and you're out there across the country talking to so many different people. And again, I think it would be a great to get you guys both on at the same time and to connect with you all on what you guys have been doing and continue to do. But Sean, Rick puts in the comments, he says most agencies, and I don't know if you can see this, Sean,
No, I
but
can't.
you can't. He says most agencies are recruiting to fill gaps, not move, grow the profession. It has become a numbers game and not a people's talent focus. His second comment is delegating versus dumping. There is a big difference between delegating
Huge.
and dumping. And you know, everybody wants to, you know, and that's a good, Rick, you make a good point about delegating and dumping. And you know, if you're just going to dump something off somebody, you're not really going to give them some of the information or skills that they need to know to how to fix the problem. You're just going to dump it off. Now, if you're going to delegate and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to give you this assignment, but along the way, if you got any questions or you run into something you don't know, you know, you know, get back with me. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and so you know, Rick puts in here. I guess Rick. I see you're still on. He says he's been traveling, consulting. Would love to connect. So definitely, Rick. It's been a while. We've had you on to get your expertise on it. Another comment he puts in is that because this has become a job and not a profession, most Gen Z mindset is why should I be loyal to the organization? And you know this, Sean. You probably have heard this. Why should I be loyal to the organization when I know the organization command staff is not loyal to me? You
Well,
know,
but yeah, because Rick makes an amazing point, and we never followed it to the very end of the conversation. But he's exactly right. It's actually backfiring. So what we're doing is we're lowering the standard, right, to get bodies and seats. We're plugging our numbers up. But guess what? All the time, energy, and money that it takes to get those officers trained up, put out on the street, and then they're gone in 2 years. So now you're going backwards. And because once you get them there, then they just stick them out there, and then they never talk to them again. They don't talk.
yeah,
There's no career
yeah,
plan. There's no mentoring. I mean, I can speak for my department. The training officer program, it for a variety of reasons, it got watered down over the years. And by the time I left, it was almost like one step above. Hey, who's available? Who
yeah,
wants to take somebody? We weren't looking at, is that the person that you would want to learn this job from?
mm-hmm.
Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you got lucky, and I was fortunate. Mike was an amazing training officer, but there are other people that you were like, oh my God, like, how is this guy even here? Much less you just signed this person to work with this guy, who's
yeah,
always complaining or whining or whatever. So I think if we just put a little bit more thought into keeping the people that you attract,
mm-hmm.
and building them up, I think then we'll be successful. But if all we're trying to do is just make sure that we say, oh, look at our staffing numbers, that doesn't
yeah,
really tell you the whole story, as you
yeah.
know better than anybody.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I share this with you and the listeners and Rick. When I came to the agency that I was just at, they were going through a real bad crisis situation. Officers were leaving the department. There was a lot of turmoil between the police department and City Hall, it was not good. And, it's coming from an outsider coming into a whole, moving halfway across the country. There's a lot of things that are not shared with the police chief. You don't find these things out until you sit until you sit at
Careful
your
what
desk.
you wish for.
Yeah,
Careful what you
yeah.
wish for. You just might get it.
Rick says, hook them, then forget about their mindset. But but anyway, so I get there, and there's a lot of sergeants who are they're uncertain about how long they're going to be with the department. I'm trying to keep people there. There's a lot of anger, and when I say anger, there's a lot of anger. I mean, hatred is another word.
Okay.
And so, I'm like, how can I keep these? Because I met with everybody individually, did one-on-ones with them, and try to get to know them. And knowing that I wasn't the person that they wanted to have sitting in that office, but I had to let them know that I'm there for them. I'm not there because somebody wants to put me there, but what can I do to help you grow? And I didn't hear a lot of people out of doing all the one-on-ones with the sergeants and the patrol. Nobody said, hey, I've had the ability to go to this type of training. I went to SWAT training. I went to drone school. I'm a drone pilot. I went to this. I went, whatever specialized training. And so came out of that, I said, okay, went to my assistant chiefs and I said, I want everybody, this is a challenge. Put together a professional development plan. And it was like, you want me to do some homework? I mean, I'm coming to work.
Yeah.
And, it's like that right there kind of, I was like, okay, I'm trying to get you to think this critical thinking skill about what do you want to do? Even if you don't want to be at this agency, what do you want to do? And this might trigger something to say, maybe this guy is a little different. Maybe I do want to stick around. Maybe I can because money was not an issue of sending people to training. It was just a willingness. And because you wasn't in the clique. And if you were in the clique, you got to be able to do certain things. You know how the cliquish thing work.
Sure.
But it really got me, Sean, that a lot of people did not want to put a professional development plan together. And it was
why would that be, Chief? Why would that be, right? If you're the officer, what does that mean to you? That means either they don't care or they're trying to box me out, right? They're trying to prevent me from being their competition, or they want to be, or they're just lazy. They just don't want to put in the effort. I want to just show up, answer the radio, and then go home, but none of those are good.
Yeah, none of them are good. And what I'd learned was that it was so much anger and hostility. Nobody really wanted to let go of whatever was going on and to look at it as a positive way. Okay, now we've got somebody who is really kind of thinking about my professional development, my professional growth. I've been with the agency for maybe 10, between 5 and 10 years. I haven't had the opportunity to get outside of the state of Minnesota to do any kind of training. But now here's somebody who is willing to give me that opportunity. And all I have to do is just put down on a piece of paper, what is it that I want? What do I need to grow? and that really kind of surprised me that nobody did that. But then people started to slowly go out the door. But again, I think when you start, and you can speak on this, and if Rick is still on here, and others that are listening to us, I think when you challenge people, do people kind of get into a shell and be like, oh, I don't know, or maybe is this a trick? Are they trying to get me to do something, or what? Because you don't, and I've heard people say this at other agencies that I've been at, especially when I was in Arkansas, Sean, was that they would say, Chief, our last chief didn't even talk about leadership. He didn't even ask, if we want to go to a conference with him. And it was almost kind of like, man, I wish you were here 5 or 6 years ago. and I said, hey, I'm here now. This is just how I lead. But do you think over a period of time, people kind of get into this? They just don't really, they want to believe it, but it's almost like they just been torn down. They haven't had those opportunities, but then here's somebody come along and who has a different mindset of being a leader that it kind of shocks them.
Yeah, because if you've been in that system where you're not like myself, and a couple people on this watching this know, to a fault, I was not in the clique,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it wasn't because for any particular reason. It was because my loyalty always was to my team, and
Mm-hmm.
above all else, it wasn't to policy, it wasn't to politics. As much as I was mindful of those things, that wasn't my primary concern, and that unfortunately was not always the way it was done. But again, if you're in an agency where uh, you don't really know, this is a new person, right? Are they just saying this just to win us over, or is this going to be real? Because if I've been in a situation where every time I've asked for years to go and the same guy keeps going and I'm not going, eh, like at some point I just stop caring, or
Mm-hmm.
thinking if it's not fair and it's not sincere,
Mm-hmm.
because I know we had a chief that came in and said, no matter, we used to have certain specialized units where they would just hand pick somebody and go, hey, we have an opening, we're going to take Tommy or Jen. And they were like, oh, wait, that's not fair. So, but then we realized that as you're in these interviews, they're writing down their shopping list because they still know who they're going to pick. They're just going
Yeah.
through the motions. That's worse.
Yeah.
That's an
That's
insult
worse.
because now
Oh
you
yeah.
wasted my time.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing too is when you're new, that's really, it's almost like they don't know you well enough yet to say, they've seen you talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk. And I know
Yeah.
when I had a chief come in, I was on like 4 or 5 years, and we had a little bit of a scandal, testing scandal in the department.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, the chief brought us into his office, and it was my entire academy class. And he said, I'm not talking to anybody that's been on longer than you guys, because essentially they're all dirty. And we're like, that's a wild statement to make, to
Yeah.
paint the entire department with this broad brush because of a couple of people that did something that we hadn't even exactly figured out,
Yeah.
who did what and when.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough,
Yeah.
because, and he meant it. And so
I'm assuming he was from the outside.
so the feeling was mutual, trust me. And he actually had never been a police officer, which was even tougher.
Oh wow.
So I mean, he'd been involved with police agencies, but he had never been, a street cop like the rest of us. So
Oh wow.
and I remember the very first thing he did, we used to carry blackjacks. He said, get rid of those,
Blackjacks.
get rid of those, get rid of the sticks. We're gonna get these asps. And I remember going like, wait, so they took
Asp.
this tiny leather thing away, but now I got to hit somebody with a metal pole? Like, this doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. But it was progressive and all that. But my
Yeah.
point is so just because you're gonna do it doesn't mean it's real. Like, it has to be legitimate, it has to be sincere, it has to be fair. So you can't send the same guy to training 5 times in a row without sending somebody else. You've got to make people understand and feel like it's done fairly. And the other thing is, make decisions out loud. Show people your work, like high school math, right?
Yeah.
Don't just say, oh, Johnny's going back to SWAT school. Explain if there's a reason why, explain it. And the reason why you're not going is because of this, but you're going on the next one, or whatever the case might be. Don't make decisions in a vacuum. Don't be afraid, just because you might get a little flack. Don't be afraid to have the conversation, because that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think you gain a lot more from just engaging with someone and saying, hey, I just want to explain to you, here's what happened, but here's the plan. And so you can understand the bigger picture and why we did what we did.
Yeah. Well, hey, Sean, we'll get to another comment that Rick put in the chat. Is that and Rick, this is something that I actually did. It's because a lot of people, Sean, they don't know you and they don't trust you.
Right.
They know you because the mayor wanted you or the city manager wanted you, but they don't trust you, and they don't trust neither one of them, who either the mayor or the city manager. So you've got a lot of odds against you. And so Rick puts in the chat is that comes down to trust before movement or change takes place. You must front load your people and answer their why. And I did that, Rick. I said, so what is your why? Why are you here? And I don't want to hear that, oh, I'm here to, you know, the same, serve and protect or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I want to know, what is the
yeah.
why? What is the why? Because you're in a profession now that you can jump up and you can go to any other agency. What is the real why? And
Right.
it threw people for kind of, it made them think,
Yeah.
the why. Okay.
Right.
And I told them, and I was very upfront with them, Sean and Rick. And I said, you don't know me and you're not going to trust me because I am an outsider. This agency has not had an outsider in decades, especially me being the first uh, person of color police chief in the history of the
Sure.
department. There's a lot that I have to build trust. You got to trust me more than I got to trust you. And some people looking like, well, wow, that doesn't, you're the chief. But I said, at the end of the day, if you don't believe in what I'm saying and you think it's a bunch of BS, you're never going to respect me. You're never going to trust me. So, and I'm not that just blunt person, but at times you have to let people have that uncomfortable conversation with people. I know what you're thinking, but I don't think you're really going to say it. Now I'm going to say it, but I'm going to say it in a very professional way.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to, tell me what your why is. And Rick just puts in the chat, when the why, it allows you to do the how.
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
how do we get past this? And that was another thing that how do you all get past the anger, the animosity, because it's not helping the citizens that we're supposed to be really serving and protecting. So
Right.
yeah, man, Sean, we have definitely went over our time a little bit. No big deal, but man, like I told you before, Sean, this is to me, it's a very important conversation, and we've
Absolutely.
got a lot of your friends and colleagues are on listening. A lot of other people are listening on YouTube and LinkedIn with Rick and Facebook. We're gonna have to come back for a part 3.
Let's do it.
And because again, I just think, because I want you to be able to hit on. You mentioned something a moment ago about, you know you talked about the flaws, but then you may have talked in the book about what were some of those flaws and how did people, I may be paraphrasing, how did they come out of those flaws and what did
Right.
they
Right.
learn? And so I think is, another piece of this conversation is, we all make mistakes. We all want to be in a position of being a leader, but what happened on the other side of when you did make a flaw, and how did you and what information did you get from people that really kind of made somebody think and like, yeah, you're right, so
Yeah.
I definitely would like to get you to come back on again for a part 3 of the 11 fatal flaws of leadership, because I think more people really need to kind of hear this conversation. And if you're thinking about being a leader, this is some good information.
Yeah. And like I mentioned last time, and I'll say it again, I say it every time I talk publicly, is I made a lot of these mistakes. I'm not ashamed to say it.
Hmm.
But it wasn't for any other reason than just a lack of experience. I was very fortunate that I never made any catastrophic mistakes, and
Hmm.
I learned what I needed to learn before my crucibles came to me later in my career. But I was very lucky. Not everybody is that lucky.
Yeah.
I've seen just like out of the movies, right? First night as a sergeant, first night as a lieutenant. When something unbelievable and once in a lifetime happens, and that it does occur. It's
Yeah.
not common, but it does happen. And I think people having the knowledge of the stuff that we're talking about, that's makes you competent, that gives you the confidence, and then it just the way you carry yourself, people know the same way when they see a squared away officer. All right, that's not the guy. Same thing here. Your team, especially after overtime, because as you
Hmm.
said earlier, you were in an unenviable position of maybe you were just another person that had been in that seat that told them the same thing. and everyone before you had not, made good on their word.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, what's so different about you? Especially if I don't know you, especially if you came from the outside or somewhere
Yeah.
else. So you're even more suspect. But
Yeah.
yeah, I would love to continue to have that conversation, because again, at the end of the day, the main goal is for these to be actionable things that people can actually learn from and take these skills back to their department and, be a better officer, be a better leader, be a better parent, be a better partner, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Ricky has one more comment in the chat. He says, by showing up every day and walking the walk and talking the talk, trust is not just a one and done thing, but a series of everyday small steps, keeping your word and caring about your people to earn trust. Walk in uh, humility. And so, it's something that if you don't have that human side of you, that humanity side of us, people are going to see that you're just not, um, you're just somebody that they put in that position, and you're not out for them. You're just in it for yourself.
We talked about it last time. I call it the matador boss, right? They
Yeah.
look pretty in the uniform, but when the bull comes, you're going to get the horn. And you only have to do that once. You only have to do that one time, and everybody knows who you are, and you're done, and it's very difficult to come back from.
Yeah.
Again, but those are the people that probably should have did a little more thinking about what was going to eventually happen to them later, because then those are the same individuals that can't understand why nobody wants to work for them. So that's where the awareness part comes in.
Yeah, I got to say this before we get off, Sean, and I may end up messing up the name of the movie, but it was a movie with Bruce Willis in the Nakatomi Plaza. What was that? It was
Die Hard.
Die Hard.
Yeah, right.
Was it? Die Hard. Die Hard 1, where the Nakatomi Plaza, where the sergeant drives up there, and next thing you know, they're shooting out the window, and they take over the building, and the deputy chief shows up, then the FBI shows up, and they start making these decisions. And the sergeant is like, you got to be kidding me. You're going to do that? And he's like, well, I'm the deputy chief. All right. Well, hey, you're the deputy chief. You go right ahead and you do it. You make a bad decision. He should have listened to the sergeant. And I say that because just because you're a lieutenant or a captain and if somebody says, we need to think about this. Maybe this isn't something we want to tactically go in and do it this way. Maybe we need to wait for other people to come, and you'd be like, no, this is what I said we're going to do. And all of a sudden you have a bad connection, something happens. So, that to me is just kind of like you're not listening to people.
Well, it's a lack of humility, and it's an inability to delegate. Because Nelson Mandela told a great story about his father was a tribal chief, and he used to watch him as a kid. And his father said, if you ever watch when all the chiefs meet, we sit in a circle. He said, and he was the head of the whole team. And he said, we do that for, because I want everyone to feel like they're part of this. It's not I'm at the head. We're all equal. He said, but I always let everybody else talk first. And I do that because I want them to feel heard. He said, and you know what? Every once in a while, I know what I'm going to say, but somebody in the circle will say something better than what I was going to say, and I'm like, okay, that's a great idea. So we don't have to take it all on. You don't have to impress anybody. And quite frankly, I think people like that, like you described the guy in the movie, they also don't realize that in that situation, had the deputy chief looked at the sergeant and said, what do you think? That one moment would have changed everything. That's the humility. That's the awareness. That's the relying on. This guy's been out here doing it for 20, 30 years. It's at least worth listening to what he's got to say before you start making life and death decisions.
Exactly.
Trusting your team.
Yeah. Hey, Sean, Rick wants to know how he can get in how you can connect with you.
Sure.
And so Rick, LinkedIn is linking us all together. So,
yes,
so before we go, Sean, let Rick know and others know how they can connect with you on your social media platforms or website or whatever, how
Sure.
people can connect with you.
The easiest way, I use LinkedIn. I'm Sean M. Carroll on there. Not the astrophysicist, rocket scientist guy who helps me out in Google. No, I'm not that smart. But yeah, Sean M. Carroll on there. I'm on all the other social media platforms, but Rick, we can definitely connect there. And we have the website that's still under construction, but it is up. It's aioleadership.com. And for anybody that's interested in a pre-order of the book, it's like I said, it's still being printed, but they can go. Yeah, we still have to fix the redirect, but you have to type the W's at the beginning, www.aioleadership.com/book. And you just enter your name and we'll put you on the list, and we'll be reaching out to people. We have a couple cool little surprises for people that do sign up for the pre-order as well.
Okay. All right. Well, Rick, again, man, I want to thank, I can't see you, Rick, but I want to, wave at you, say thank you for always following the podcast and being a good friend. And I know you got a busy schedule, but I'll definitely be reaching out to you to try to see if we can connect and get you to come on the podcast. Because I reached out to Rick not too long ago, and he connected me with a real good friend of his who I had on the podcast. And so, again, it's always good to connect with people who can help you grow. And I can't thank you, Sean, enough, and Rick for following the podcast and just believing in me to be able to come on here, to sit down and have these conversations about leadership and just about policing in general. So again, I want to thank everybody who Sean is brought on, who's on the screen with us. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. And again, tell a friend about You and the Law podcast. Go to our YouTube, subscribe, trying to get those subscribers numbers up, and go to our Facebook page and like and share, and listen to our rebroadcast on Spotify. Go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you're an Android person like me, you're going to be on, you're not going to be on Apple, but you can definitely go to Apple Podcasts if you have an iPhone, and you can find You and the Law podcast. So, and also you can go to our website, which is www.youandthelawpodcast.com. That's www.youandthelawpodcast.com. You can find out more about the podcast. You can also find all of our different social media handles on the website. Sean, it's been great, man. I know we went over almost 30 minutes, but again, when you're having good conversation, it's hard to stop.
Yes, if I could, I just wanted to do 2 shout outs. I know my Miguel's out there, but my good friend Rob ran another half marathon, did an amazing job. That's a huge accomplishment, and I just wanted to say how grateful I am to have him here. He's an amazing guy. And also to my daughter, she's 3. She'll be due tomorrow. Will be 3 weeks left until my first grandbaby. So we have she has a little girl coming out to the world that we're excited to meet.
Congratulations!
So, a lot of exciting moments here. So thank you for having all of us on, and thank you everybody out there for tuning in. It really means a lot. And thank you, Chief, for what you do and for giving us a platform to try to pay it forward and make things better for everybody behind us. So thank you again.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I got to tell you, man, I envy the background that you, the video that you put out on LinkedIn the other day. The scenery is amazing. So,
But when I used to say living the dream, it was sarcastic, but now it's real. Living in the Caribbean. Although when I have to record now, the only issue is I got to watch out for all the chickens and roosters that want to interrupt my audio. So
One
of the perils of the Caribbean. Could be worse.
All right. Well, Sean, hang tight. I'm gonna close us out, and but again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight's topic as we part 2 of our conversation about the 11 fatal flaws of leadership. We're going to have a part 3 that's going to be coming up. We're going to work on some dates to get part 3 of this conversation back on again. But again, thank you all, and make sure you tune in next Thursday right here on You and the Law podcast for another informative conversation about policing in America.
And if I may, Chief, before we go, Chief Randall Moody, good friend of mine, great guy, was actually a student of mine, and now I'm a student of his. He just retired. I just want to say congratulations to him. He's moved on to a much better chapter. So I told him, hurry up and enjoy it, because, we may not have a whole lot of time left. But he's an amazing guy. had an outstanding career out in the West Coast, and now he's retired to the East Coast. And I just want to say congratulations. Amazing guy, and really happy for him. All the success that he's had.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we'll kick this back off again next Thursday, right here at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on You and the Law podcast. Everybody have a good night, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode of You and the Law podcast. We've got more eye-opening conversations and hard-hitting insights coming your way, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and stay ready because the next episode might just change the way you see law enforcement forever.